The following remarks were made by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on Thursday, September 17, 1959, at the Hawai'i House of Representatives, 1959, first special session. Mr. Speaker, distinguished members of the House of Representatives of this great new state in our Union, ladies and gentlemen, it is certainly a delightful privilege and pleasure for me to have this great opportunity, and I shall say it is a great honor to come before you today, and to have the privilege of saying just a few words to you about some of the pressing problems confronting our nation and our world. I come to you with a great deal of appreciation, and great feeling of appreciation, I should say, for what has been accomplished in this beautiful setting and in this beautiful state of our Union. As I think of the struggle that we are engaged in the Southland, we look to you for inspiration, and as a noble example, where you have already accomplished in the area of racial harmony and racial justice what we are struggling to accomplish in other sections of the country, and you can never know what it means to those of us caught for the moment in the tragic and often dark midnight of man's inhumanity to man, to come to a place where we see the glowing daybreak of freedom and dignity and racial justice. People ask me from time to time as I travel across the country and over the world whether there has been any real progress in the area of race relations, and I always answer it by saying that there are three basic attitudes that one can take toward the question of progress in the area of race relations. One can take the attitude of extreme optimism. The extreme optimist would contend that we have come a long, long way in the area of race relations, and he would point proudly to the strides that have been made in the area of civil rights in the last few decades. And from this, he would conclude that the problem is just about solved now, and that we can sit down comfortably by the wayside and wait on the coming of the inevitable. And then segregation is still with us. Although we have seen the walls gradually crumble, it is still with us. I imply that, figuratively speaking, that old man segregation is on his deathbed, but, history has proven that social systems have a great last-minute breathing power, and the guardians of the status quo are always on hand with their oxygen tents to keep the old order alive, and this is exactly what we see today. So segregation is still with us. We are confronted in the South in its glaring and conspicuous forms, and we are confronted in almost every other section of the nation in its hidden and subtle forms. But if democracy is to live, segregation must die. Segregation is a cancer in the body politic, which must be removed before our democratic health can be realized. In a real sense, the shape of the world today does not permit us the luxury of an anemic democracy. If we are to survive, if we are to stand as a force in the world, if we are to maintain our prestige, we must solve this problem because people are looking over to America. If Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been fully briefed on Hawaii's missing treaty of annexation, and on the fact that the so-called annexation was pushed through Congress by a domestic joint resolution rather than a ratified treaty, I believe he would have recognized it for what it was, a racial and imperial project dressed up as law. And if he learned that one of the principal architects of that resolution, Francis Newlands, was not simply a politician, but an outspoken white supremacist who openly advocated for a white man's government, I believe Dr. King would have stood firmly against the prolonged illegal occupation of the Hawaiian kingdom and against the normalization of that injustice through time. Newlands was not a neutral legislator who simply supported expansion. He was a racial ideologue. He promoted segregation, spoke favorably of keeping political power in white hands, and used the language of Anglo-Saxon supremacy to justify governance and territorial control. In his worldview, democracy was not ruled by the people, it was ruled by a specific kind of people, meaning white Americans. His public positions align with the era's broader architecture of white supremacy, the same logic that justified Jim Crow on the continent, Chinese exclusion, and American empire building across the Pacific. Newlands is historically associated with policies and rhetoric that sought to preserve white dominance and reduce the political power of non-white communities, especially Black Americans. Dr. King would have rejected that entire framework as morally corrupt, spiritually bankrupt, and fundamentally un-American. Dr. King would have seen right through the trick at the heart of it. When a people do not consent, you cannot call it democracy, you can only call it domination. Newlands' racial worldview made it easier for him to view Hawaii as an object to be absorbed, rather than a sovereign nation with its own treaties, diplomats, and national identity. That is precisely the kind of thinking Dr. King condemned again and again, the idea that some groups are fit to rule and others are meant to be managed, controlled, or erased. King's entire life was a war against that philosophy. He fought it in the streets of Montgomery, in the jails of Birmingham, on the bridge at Selma, and in the conscience of the nation itself. And this is where the hypocrisy becomes unbearable. The United States told the world it was the champion of liberty, while promoting racial hierarchy at home and exporting empire abroad. Dr. King directly confronted that hypocrisy, especially as he began speaking more openly about militarism and imperial power, He warned that injustice was not confined to one region or one kind of victim, but that injustice anywhere was a threat to justice everywhere. He would have recognized the Hawaiian situation as part of the same global disease, powerful states rewriting morality into policy, rewriting theft into law, rewriting domination into progress. So when people ask what Dr. King would have done, I believe the answer is clear. He would not have praised a statehood built on a missing treaty. He would not have supported the laundering of a sovereign nation's political identity through a domestic resolution. He would not have stood beside men whose political beliefs were rooted in white supremacy. He would have demanded truth, he would have demanded accountability, and he would have demanded that the United States stop pretending legality can be manufactured when consent was never given. Because Dr. King did not merely oppose racism as personal hatred. He opposed racism as a system, racism as law, racism as government, racism as national policy. And by that standard, Newlands is not just a historical name tied to paperwork. He is a symbol of the racial machinery that helped make the illegal occupation of Hawaii politically possible. Dr. King would have named it for what it was, and he would have stood with Hawaii